welcome to Let's Talk. So let's talk. Welcome back, you guys. I appreciate you being here. I hope that you have subscribed to this channel and have commented on the last video, which would be the giveaway, the subscriber giveaway. And all you have to do is tell me which Bible you want. If you want to be a part of the drawing, just go over there and tell me which Bible you want, because it's important that you put your comments on that video, the giveaway video, because that's the video that the comment picker will be choosing from. So if you would like a free Bible, that's beautiful Bibles, you have a choice, one of three, and you have to watch the video in order to know which one, and be a subscriber. That's all you have to do. And we'll be giving away a Bible in about a week, so be sure to go see that. Okay, so this is our new book. It is very thin. It is called The Miracle of the Seventh-Day Ox, and it's by Bradley Booth. It says they could take away Nikolai's freedom, but they couldn't make him disobey his God. That is so important. Here is the excerpt. Do you mean to tell me that you've been locking this man up in a crate for 2 years, and it hasn't done any good? Did it ever occur to you that there may be a good reason this man isn't following your orders? Nikolai Panchuk, a pastor living in communist Russia, struggled as a prisoner of the KGB to find his purpose. Persecuted for his Christian faith, Nikolai remained in a Siberian camp for 10 years, refusing to sacrifice his faith and suffering the consequences. Harassed, beaten, and dejected, Nikolai found hope in the unlikeliest source, an old ox named Maxim. With the help of the strength of God, Nikolai and Maxim worked together to perform a weekly miracle, witnessing for Christ in the most disparaging of circumstances and winning souls along the way. This book was written by Bradley Booth, and Bradley Booth has taught in Adventist schools in the United States, West Africa, and Russia. The stories of this book were taken from personal accounts in hopes that the readers will rekindle their love for evangelism and proclaim the gospel in whatever circumstances they may find themselves. Okay, we're going to get started with Chapter 1, Miracle of the Seventh-Day Ox by Bradley Booth. Narrated by Let's Talk, Stefanie Pettis. Chapter 1. Nikolai Panchuk stared at the four walls in his jail cell around him. The cold, gray concrete made him feel as if he were in a tomb, cold and frightened and alone. What would become of him? What was to be his fate? He had refused to cooperate with the KGB thus far, refused to betray the whereabouts of yet another fledgling church he had helped organize only a month ago. It wasn't a large church, just a company of believers in the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. But Nikolai had refused to turn over a list of the members to the KGB. And who could blame him? The gospel message was spreading so fast that every few months Nikolai was forming yet another company of believers. At present, he was a shepherd and a pastor of 11 such congregations. Groups typically met to worship in houses and cellars and barns, but 15 or 20 members seemed to be the magic number before the group was considered too large. The places they met were just too small to hold more than that number, and everyone loved the close-knit family feeling they experienced from being a part of the company of the Seventh-day Adventist Christians. Nikolai leaned back against the cold wall of the prison cell and closed his eyes. The peace came from worshiping with like believers was more than enough pay for the pain and hardship he had faced during the past few months. It wasn't easy, but he was getting used to it. 5 times now, the KGB had cornered him to find out information about the Seventh-day Adventist Church members who were meeting in scattered companies in the towns and small villages of the area. Twice they had come to his house, and 3 times they had used a public confrontation to humiliate him and tried to make him talk. The KGB needed that crucial list of church members. Without it, everything was a hit-and-miss operation for them, like sifting for needles in the chaff of a haystack. Fortunately for Nikolai, the KGB in the area where he had lived were decent enough to leave his family out of it. Other pastors in Russia had not been so lucky. Nikolai had heard terrible stories of what the KGB did sometimes to get the pastors to talk. But Nikolai always remained steadfast and determined in his promise to leave everything in God's hands. His faith was strong. He would not betray the church members and their trust, no matter what the cost to himself or his family. But this time, the interrogation process was different. It was obvious the KGB had something else in mind for Nikolai. When he had first arrived at the KGB headquarters, they had sat him in a chair and kept him awake for more than 2 days. They had used proverbial bright lights in his eyes, shouting tactics, and even threats of where they might send him to help straighten him out. But all to no avail. Nikolai had remained undaunted and unmovable. Their tactics did not intimidate him. Unfortunately, the KGB were more persistent. They were determined. What was to come next was anybody's guess, though Nikolai felt it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. He was considered an enemy of the state. Christians were on the hit list of rebels who needed to be reformed and retooled for society. If they could be punished enough, maybe they would finally see the light. Those were the words from the top on down. But Nikolai guessed that a few in the upper ranks of the military ever bothered themselves about what actually happened to pastors such as Nikolai. As long as the KGB methods produced results, they cared little about the details. Nikolai wondered what time it was. He had no watch, and the scant meals they brought him were only indications that time was passing. Though he was sure he had been in his cell for several days now. For Nikolai, time seemed to stand still. Suddenly, Nikolai heard footsteps coming down the long concrete corridor. The footsteps slowed and then stopped in front of his cell, and he could hear a hand fumbling with the keys in the door. "On your feet!" a voice barked. Nikolai scrambled to his feet in time to see a big burly figure fill the doorway. A lone 40-watt bulb burning in the corridor cast eerie shadows past the hulking frame. Nikolai assumed that the man was one of the guards who had been bringing him his meals since he had arrived. "The boss wants to see you." Nikolai waited for the guard to give him specific orders, but the big man simply pulled him into the corridor and pushed him in the direction he wanted him to go. They went up a flight of concrete stairs, and then down another hallway until it came into a big room with a large desk in it and 2 straight-back chairs. Other than that, the only thing in the room was another light bulb burning feebly high overhead. Behind the desk sat an intimidating officer in a gray-green uniform. A manila folder lay open on the desk in front of him. He never bothered to raise his eyes when Nikolai walked in, but continued staring at the contents of the folder over horn-rimmed reading glasses. A shot glass and a bottle of vodka sat on the desk beside him, and a long cigarette dangled from his clean-shaven mouth. Nikolai remained standing, not daring to sit down in the second chair. Whatever was coming next would no doubt be better received standing up. "Preacher man," the officer threw out the expression he had been using on Nikolai for the past several days. "Have you given my proposition some more thought?" The officer still did not look at Nikolai in the eye, and Nikolai was grateful for it. Eye contact was a code of intimidation with the KGB. If a prisoner should respond to such a gesture with eye contact of his own, it was understood that the victim was ready to finally come to some kind of agreement. And for Nikolai, that was impossible. He knew he could never bring himself to agree to the KGB's terms, that he would reveal the list of the church members in his district. Never, never, never in 1,000 years. But the officer was waiting, and Nikolai knew there was nothing for him to do except tell the boss exactly what he had told him before. His mind was made up. There would be no compromise, no deal. For Nikolai, there was no other choice, and he knew the officer would soon grow impatient because of it. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't comply. My God and my conscience just won't allow it." The officer pushed Nikolai's folder away and folded his arms across his chest. Nikolai kept his eyes fixed on the wall behind the officer's head, but he could tell that the man was staring at him over the tops of his glasses, and it made him very nervous. Chapter 2. "Is that all you have to say for yourself?" the KGB officer growled. Nikolai hesitated for only a moment. "Sir, that is my final decision." The officer shook his head. "You're serious, aren't you?" He took the cigarette from his mouth and tapped a long string of ashes onto the floor. "I am, sir." "You are a stubborn man." The officer shook his head again and sighed in frustration. "We've used all the usual methods and forms of diplomacy we know." He put the cigarette back into his mouth and took another long drag from it. "I wish you were on our side, preacher man. It would make my job so much easier." Preacher man. Nikolai dared to smile at the nickname the officer had given him. And diplomacy? Their process of interrogation was anything but diplomatic. Victims of the KGB had choices, all right, but they were very one-sided. Either allow yourself to be persuaded and comply, or else pay the piper. The officer finished his cigarette and poured a shot glass of vodka. Surprisingly, he extended the glass in Nikolai's direction, but Nikolai declined with a simple, "Thank you, sir, but I don't drink." The officer grunted and set down the glass roughly, spilling half of the vodka on the file folder in front of him. His mood quickly turned from warm to sour. "Well, I can see I'm getting nowhere fast, preacher man. I've got more important things to do than to waste my time with you." He raised his voice. "I might as well be talking to the wall for all the good that this conversation is doing. We've kept you awake, hammering you insistently, but you won't break. We've offered you bribes and positions in our organization. We've even been willing to concede from some of the restrictions we've put on you during the past encounters. But you always give us the same answer. It's obvious you're going to be of no help here." The officer raised his hand to shake his finger at Nikolai. "I am tired of this nonsense. We were hoping to talk to you and make some sense out of this whole situation, but I can see that you are more stubborn than ever." He pulled a handkerchief from his uniform pocket and sopped up the spilt vodka before closing the manila folder. "Your case is out of my hands. My superiors expect results, and if I can't get them, there's going to be a price to pay." His voice grew calm again. "I like you, Nikolai, but if we can't come to an agreement, then there's nothing I can do to save you." It was the first time he had used Nikolai's name since Nikolai had first come to the prison 5 days before. "I have been instructed to inform you that you are being sentenced to a labor in prison camp in Siberia. Unless you are ready to answer our questions, there's nothing more I can do." To Nikolai's surprise, the officer stood to his feet and extended his hand. "Good luck, preacher man. May your God be with you." He gestured toward the door, nodded to the guard, and then sat down again to finish his paperwork. As Nikolai turned to go, he thought he had saw a look of pity in the KGB officer's eyes, but he knew he must be mistaken. KGB officers were known for their hard hearts and their unflinching determination to get information out of their victims. Nikolai was led back to his cell, and the door changed, shut behind him. He took stock in the situation. Things were not looking good. There was no doubt that he had made the right decision. But at what cost? He had no idea how long he would be sentenced to the frigid wastelands of Siberia. Years? Decades? Until he died? He cringed as he thought of the dreaded sentence, so frightening to any prisoner's ears. Banishment to the Siberian frontier. Summer temperatures in Siberia could be cool and damp, with swarms of black flies and huge bloodthirsty mosquitoes everywhere. And with no towns or settlements in the vast wasteland, he had heard that escape was impossible. There was little chance of survival should a prisoner even attempt to make an escape. But it was the winters in Siberia that were the most fearsome for a prisoner. Temperatures sometimes dropped to 50 degrees below zero, and with the biting wind that chased its way across the Northland, living conditions were unthinkable. Nikolai shivered in his cell just thinking about the prospects of such a future. There was still time for him to rethink the whole thing, time to change his mind and escape the fate that had been handed him. But of course Nikolai knew that he would never do that. He could not. It was against everything he had ever believed and stood for all his life. Allegiance to the higher power in his life was the most important thing now. The Russian KGB could take away his pulpit. They could take away his freedom and even his health. But they would never take away his choice to serve God and be true to Him. And now, the recommendations of the secret police. The communist government was going to exile him to an outpost prison in Siberia. It was a heavy price to pay, but Nikolai had no doubt in his mind that God was going to be with him. He would not give up his resolve to guard his church members' names. He would continue to speak for God no matter where he lived. He would witness for God no matter what it cost him. And who knew? Maybe the Holy Spirit would use him to do even greater things for God than he was already doing. Time would tell.